Hi, my name is Rory, and the project that I've done and the presentation I'm giving today is called Modelling Green Hydrogen Payoffs, an Analysis of the UK Subsidy Scheme. So for the past 5 years, I've been working at an energy company called Statkraft, which is why I'm particularly interested in the future of green hydrogen in the UK. So first off, what is green hydrogen? So green hydrogen is any hydrogen that's produced via electrolysis, where the power for the electrolyzer is coming from a renewable source, such as wind or solar or nuclear. So how does the government subsidy work? The subsidy is paid per unit of hydrogen produced, and the subsidy payoff is given by a strike price minus a reference price. So the strike price will be part of your bid, it's fixed, and it'll be part of your bid to the government for the subsidy. Whereas the reference price is given by a month ahead gas price. So what that means is that the payoff that you get from the government will be very large if gas prices collapse, and the payoff will be very small if gas prices are very high. An important feature of the subsidy is that the electrolyzer can only run during what are called green hours. So green hours are hours where the carbon intensity of the grid is, I think it's 50 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour or less. And so what that means is that I think it's a maximum or a minimum of around 90% of the power on the grid has to be coming from renewable sources. And then the rest can come from like fossil fuels like gas or whatever. So why does the UK need green hydrogen? So the reason why we need green hydrogen is because we're massively increasing our wind capacity. But the problem is that we have very limited storage, and you need to meet demand at every second. So in the UK at the moment, we've got around 25 gigawatt hours of storage capacity. And so what that tells you is that there's less than an hour's worth of storage capacity in the UK at the moment. So if the wind stops blowing, it'll be very hard to keep the lights on, basically. And so you need to massively increase that storage capacity. And green hydrogen is a good way of potentially doing that. So my focus for my dissertation is introducing green hydrogen as an alternative fuel for CCGTs. So a CCGT is a closed cycle gas turbine. At the moment, they produce around 30 to 40% of the power in the UK. And they run on gas, but it seems as if in the future, there'll be engines that are able to run on both hydrogen and gas. So I've sort of created an energy flow diagram here to help explain how this setup will work. So you'll get electricity off the grid, they'll run an electrolyzer, they'll produce hydrogen, they'll be put into storage, and then later when power prices are higher, you'll use that hydrogen to run a CCGT. So this presentation and my dissertation was split into two parts. So the first is a backward induction model that optimizes the revenue of this setup here. And the second part is simulation models for the three underlying commodities that will determine the payoffs of this setup. So the three commodities that we're interested in are carbon, gas, and clean spark spread. So clean spark spread is power minus the cost of gas and carbon. And the way in which you can imagine, or you can sort of understand intuitively, it's the hourly profit of a CCGT that's running on gas. And so the three sources of revenue for this setup are the electrolyzer revenue, the CCGT revenue when it's running on hydrogen, and the CCGT revenue when it's running on gas. So the backward induction model. So this model works by creating an N by P matrix, which I've called optimal value mat, and where N is the number of storage levels of the hydrogen, and P is the number of time steps in your optimization. So every entry ij represents the optimal value of the sort of CCGT and electrolyzer setup from time step j until the end of the optimization, where the storage level of the hydrogen is I. So to sort of explain this algorithm, as the name suggests, it's a backward induction model. So you begin in the final row of the optimal value map and you set all of those values to 0 because you're saying, okay, well, at this point, there's no extra revenue that can be added because we're at the end of the optimization. And for all previous rows, what you say is, okay, I'm in state ij. That means either I can run the electrolyzer, go to I plus 1, j plus 1. I can run the CCGT on gas, so go to ij plus 1, or I can run the CCGT on hydrogen, so go to I minus 1, j plus 1. And the way in which you ascribe the value to ij is you look at the payoffs for the transition. So that's running the electrolyzer or running the CCGT on hydrogen or gas. And then you look at the value of the future state and you say, okay, what is the maximum out of the three? And then that gives you the value for IJ. And you do that recursively until you reach the first row. And the way in which you would determine the dispatch of our, so how the asset will run, is you just do this algorithm, but in reverse. So you say, okay, I'm at IJ, I know the transition payoffs, and I know the future states of the value. What makes the most sense for me to do? Should I run the electrolyzer? Should I run the CCGT on hydrogen? Or should I run the CCGT on, oh, sorry, should I run the CCGT on gas, or should I run it on hydrogen? So this model, for me, made intuitive sense, but obviously you have to make sure that it actually works in reality. So this is quite hard because there aren't any CCGT and electrolyzer setups in the UK because the subsidy scheme hasn't even, started. So what I've done as a reasonable comparison is I've taken two pump storage sites, so they're called Foyers and Cruachan, and I've compared how they dispatched against how the backward induction model, which recreated their sort of payoffs, would dispatch. So looking at the two top rows here, so this is monthly generation from 2017 to 2021 and monthly demand. And what you can see is that the generation and demand is a lot higher in the backward induction model. And if you look at the bottom row here, so this is the sort of hourly shape. And what you can see is that our dynamic program or backward induction model, whatever you want to call it, it has much more defined shape. And the reason for both of these features is actually the same thing. It's because our model is optimized using perfect foresight. So we know exactly what day ahead prices are going to be, whereas whoever owns these assets won't know what day ahead power prices are going to be. And so that's a really important distinction between our model and what happens in reality. So we have to sort of account for that when we're looking at the payoffs. So moving on to simulation. So I separated simulating gas and carbon from simulating clean spark spread because first off, gas and carbon have a daily time step, and also they can't go negative. And so slightly different, what's it called, stochastic models. So the two that I used, I compared for gas and carbon were the geometric Brownian motion and exponential Ornstein-Uhlenbeck. I found in my dissertation, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but what I found is that the exponential Ornstein-Uhlenbeck was a much better model fit. And another thing that I found quite interesting is that the residuals fit a Laplacian distribution rather than a normal one, which is where normal distributions are usually what are used in industry. So that's what I thought was quite an interesting feature. So moving on to clean spark spread. So for clean spark spread, somewhat similarly, I use a Brownian motion and Ornstein-Uhlenbeck, where these have the feature that they can go negative, which is quite important. The first thing I noticed when I ran these models is that there's a, what's it called, an autocorrelation at 24 hours. And this is actually exactly what you would expect because clean spark spread has a very defined shape, where in the like early evening, you'll have much higher power, like clean spark spread prices, and in the middle of the night, they'll be much lower. And this just simply reflects demand for power. And so what I did was I deseasonalized the historic clean spark spread data, and I found that the autocorrelation was a lot lower. So that sort of fixed that, in my opinion. Looking at the two models, in my opinion, neither of them worked particularly well. So I think the Ornstein-Uhlenbeck model worked on an hourly level quite well, but then if you look to a monthly time step, it just doesn't have the kind of dispersion that you'd want to see in one of these simulation models. And what I came to realize is that actually, if you want to properly simulate the price dynamics of clean spark spread, you're going to need to use two separate Ornstein-Uhlenbeck models. So one with a very high mean reversion and high volatility for the short-term hourly fluctuations, and then another one with a lower volatility and lower mean reversion that captures the more like long-term dispersion. So yeah, conclusion. So in this presentation, I've shown how you would model, what's it called, a backward a CCGT with an electrolyzer and storage added to it, and how you might simulate the underlying commodities that will determine the payoffs. Some potential improvements, as I mentioned, you need to introduce uncertainty into the backward induction model. For the gas and carbon simulations, I actually thought the models were pretty good. And for the clean spark spread simulations, you're going to probably need at least 2 OU processes to properly capture the price dynamics.